The U.S. economy shrinking in the first quarter of the year for the first time in 3 years. And what's the government doing about it? Spending more tax dollars on more programs. Try $1.3 billion on developing manufacturing centers all over the U.S. They say it'll help the economy, but will spending more on more government-backed initiatives actually hurt, not help? Hi, everybody. I'm David Aslan. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Sabrina Schaefer, Mike Ozanian, Rick Unger, and John Tamny. Steve, who better to start with than a guy who just wrote a book about money? This is a must-read on how to protect the global economy. So is another government-directed spending plan going to help?
No, David, you just asked the question, that $1.3 billion, who would you rather have that money in the hands of, bureaucrats or venture capitalists? And if venture capitalists aren't putting that money to work, why? Because of regulations, taxation, all the uncertainty. The government created the right environment. We'd have much more manufacturing, much more robust economy.
Rick, we've had two experiments in coming out of a deep recession over the past 30 years, one in the 80s, where you go through and look at the various years of growth in the 80s. The average coming out of that recession was 3.5% growth. The average coming out of this recession is basically flat. Doesn't that show that the less government does, the better?
No, I don't know that that makes that statement at all. Look, there's no arguing that this recession has been far more difficult to get out of than previous ones, but I think that's the reality of life. Some recessions are going to be worse than others. Some actually reach the level of depression. Where I have to disagree a little bit with Steve is the plan that's being put forth now actually is taking government money to help those in the private markets to begin investing in manufacturing. Not sure why that's a bad idea. I'd be willing to bet my friend Steve liked it when Jack Kemp was the first to recommend enterprise zones. It was a Republican idea.
Well, of course, he wasn't president, and Reagan was, and Obama is. And President Obama, in outlining this plan, Rich Karlgaard, said the following, I'm going to quote, President Obama has focused on boosting U.S. manufacturing by rewarding companies that create jobs here, rescuing the U.S. auto industry, and expanding exports. Again, he rewards companies. He rescued the U.S. auto company. He's putting himself and the government at the forefront of this economy.
Yeah, it all sounds good, doesn't it? But, you know, the greatest example of a free market versus government assistance that we have in recent memory that applies directly to manufacturing is that between Ford Motor and General Motors. Ford Motor is just rocking it now, and they did it all on their own, and they did it with innovation, and they did it with global expansion, and they've added jobs, and General Motors continues to have problems. You know, look at the most recent scandal that's been brewing in General Motors. So this is, you know, Steve gets to the point. You know, we've got to decide whether this is welfare or whether it's really investment. And if it's really investment, then why aren't private investors coming in?
And by the way, Mike, Chrysler, which was bailed out, is now an Italian car company, so we won't even get into that. But the bottom line is this is crony capitalism. Wherever you have the government that involved in the process of generating an economy, that's where you end up with these pathetic stats.
I agree, David, and crony capitalism was one of the reasons we got into the recession in the first place. But I also got to take a step back from this. I mean, how puny has the president become where he actually thinks that $1.4 billion in a $17 trillion economy is going to amount to anything? I mean, what a small-minded thinking individual. I mean, when you have something that's temporary anyway, investors know and it doesn't work. You need measures that are permanent. That's what creates hiring and create jobs. That's what we need, something like permanent reductions in marginal tax rates. That will get investment and hiring up. And
Sabrina, the American people, I think, actually more agree with Mike Ozanian's view on the economy than they do with the president. So you look at a recent poll, only 46% approve, 50% disapprove.
Well, I think it's because the American people are picking up on the president and many Republicans' confusion, for that matter, about what kind of economy we're living in today. Right? Today, 70% of our wealth is created from the service sector, from an information economy, not from producing stuff. And so while, of course, we all want people to have more jobs, the president shouldn't be in the business of determining where those resources go. What's more, he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. The manufacturing industry is, in fact, growing right now, and it's expected to surpass $2 trillion this year. Number one reason is because of affordable, clean, natural gas, something that Democrats and progressives are at war with. So if the president really wants to spur, manufacturing growth, he should stop pouring money at it at the same time as he's over-regulating the energy industry.
And John Tamny, just stop trying to direct it. I mean, these pathetic, really negative figures on growth is an indictment of central planning, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, I've said it a lot on the show before, but governments have no resources. The only way they can spend money is that if they tax and borrow it from us first. And so you have this horrible scenario whereby Harry Reid, Barack Obama, and John Boehner are allocating capital instead of Warren Buffett, Paul Tudor Jones, Ken Fisher, and Jeff Bezos. When politicians direct capital, they by definition do it wastefully. We don't have capital to waste, and so it's of course going to slow the economy down.
Greg Gutfeld, who's a colleague of ours here at Fox, he has banned the phrase government funding. He said there's no such thing as government funding. It is taxpayer funded. Everything the government does comes from us, right?
Well, Greg bans a lot of phrases that I might be more inclined to use.
But that's a good one to ban. Government funding doesn't exist.
Look,
it's taxpayer funded.
I got to mess a little bit with Sabrina's argument. On the one hand, she's saying that 70% of our economy is service. I agree. But then she points out that the manufacturing sector is indeed growing in this country, and the whole point of this plan is to help guide it into some areas where the type of employees live that can fill those factories and create
fair
jobs.
enough. Let's have her respond. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Well, look, my point is that the manufacturing industry is growing on its own. But to get back to what's good for taxpayers is that people are thinking the president has perpetuated this narrative that to help the middle class, we need to have more manufacturing jobs. But it's actually not a net negative that manufacturing has moved overseas in large numbers. The fact is something else that's so important to a thriving society is to be able to access affordable products and goods from all over the world. And the fact is the American middle class can do that now as a result of this shift. And so it's not sort of a zero-sum game, so to speak.
Well, Steve, the point is that the market can allocate things far better than central planners can, right?
Yes, David, and the key thing is the market can create resources, as Mike and John point out, far better than the government ever could. And as for Rick's point about Jack Kemp and enterprise zones, Jack Kemp wanted to reduce regulations, reduce taxation, let entrepreneurs come in and do the job. Manufacturing, we're now getting a renaissance because of cheap energy, which has been pointed out the liberals opposed. If the government got out of the way, this economy would boom.
Rick?
I don't disagree with the words Steve said, but what he's leaving out is that money, tax credits, money were going into those enterprise zones. So in addition to the list Steve offered, which is true, there was also that.
But Mike Ozanian, the whole country should be an enterprise zone. Isn't that the point?
Yes, that is the darn point, David.
Right.
We used to be an enterprise zone.
Why is the president saying we need people in manufacturing plants as opposed to, let's say, technicians at the next Google or Facebook?
Okay. Last word from Mike Ozanian.